I grew up learning how to be quiet in my own house. Not literally quiet, I laughed, talked, did chores, but emotionally quiet. I learned early that taking up too much space, having too many needs, or asking for too much attention made things uncomfortable. My parents never said it outright, but the rules were clear. Aaron needed more. Aaron deserved more. Aaron came first. My brother was only 2 years older than me, but it felt like decades. When he forgot homework, teachers were too hard on him. When he quit another job after 2 weeks, it was because his boss didn't recognize his talent. When he slept until noon, it was because he was burned out. Every excuse wrapped in sympathy, every failure softened into something noble. I learned to be the opposite. I got good grades because no one reminded me. I learned how to cook because dinner needed to be made. I worked part-time in high school and full-time as soon as I graduated because I didn't want to be a burden. I told myself I liked being independent, that I preferred not needing anyone. But the truth was simpler. I didn't feel safe needing help. When I stayed living at home after turning 21, it wasn't because I was stuck. It was strategic. Rent in the city was brutal, and I wanted to save, build something solid. My parents agreed as long as I paid rent. Fair enough. I paid more than fair, actually. I covered utilities, bought my own groceries, and still helped when things ran short. I thought that was what adults did. Aaron, meanwhile, still had his childhood bedroom. No rent, no bills. Just vague plans and loud opinions about how the world owed him a break. My parents called me the responsible one, like it was a compliment. They said they were proud of me, but pride felt cheap when it came without protection. Still, part of me hoped that if I kept proving myself, something would shift. That they'd finally look at me and say, "We see you." The night everything cracked started like any other. My mom asked me to sit at the kitchen table. The same table where I'd done homework alone while Aaron played video games. The same table where family meetings always seemed to cost me something. She smiled too tightly. "We need to talk about rent," she said. I remember the hum of the refrigerator, the way my dad wouldn't meet my eyes. I asked why, already knowing the answer. "Things are getting more expensive," my dad said. "And your brother needs a little support right now." A little. That word burned. They explained it calmly, like it was logical, like I'd obviously understand. They were raising my rent by a lot, enough to hurt, but it would help the family. Help Aaron get back on his feet. Help him breathe. I stared at them, waiting for the part where they acknowledged what they were asking of me, waiting for a thank you, an apology. Anything didn't come. Instead, my mom said, "You're strong, you can handle it." In that moment, something inside me shifted. I realized that strength, to them, meant sacrifice. It meant silence. It meant I would always be the one expected to bend. I nodded. I agreed. I went to my room and closed the door. And for the first time, I wondered what would happen if I stopped being the reliable one and chose myself instead. For the first month after the rent increase, I told myself it was temporary. I adjusted my budget, cut out anything that felt like a luxury, and picked up extra shifts whenever I could. I skipped dinners with friends, ignored invitations, and let exhaustion become normal. Every sacrifice felt like an investment. If I just held on long enough, surely something would change. Nothing did. The house stayed the same, but the imbalance grew heavier. Aaron's laughter floated down the hallway while I came home late, feet aching, head buzzing from too many hours on my feet. He ordered takeout without a second thought while I counted coins before grocery shopping. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I swallowed it. I always did. One evening, I overheard my parents talking in the living room. I wasn't trying to listen, but my name came up, followed by my brother's. My mother said the increased rent was helping cover Aaron's car payment. My father joked that it was cheaper than therapy for him. They laughed softly, like it was harmless. I stood frozen in the hallway, the words settling into me like cold water. My money wasn't going towards shared expenses. It wasn't a family emergency. It was going directly to making Aaron's life easier while mine grew smaller. When I finally confronted them, my voice didn't shake the way I expected. I asked them to be honest. I asked if they would have done the same thing to Aaron if the roles were reversed. The silence answered for them. My mom tried to soften it. She said Aaron was fragile right now. My dad reminded me that families help each other. Neither of them acknowledged how much I was already giving or how little I was receiving in return. "You're not struggling," my dad said. "You're doing fine." Fine. Because I was functioning, because I didn't complain, because I kept going. They assumed I didn't feel the weight. They couldn't see that I was tired in ways sleep wouldn't fix. I paid the raised rent again. And again. Each payment felt like erasing myself a little more. I stopped decorating my room, stopped imagining a future there. I wasn't a daughter in that house anymore. I was a solution to a problem they didn't want to solve properly. The breaking point came quietly. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I was meal prepping for the week, stacking identical containers in the fridge. Aaron walked in, complaining about how unfair his life was, how no one understood him. My mom nodded sympathetically and handed him cash. Cash I recognized as coming from my last paycheck. Something inside me went still. I realized then that no amount of loyalty would ever earn me fairness. No amount of giving would teach them to value me. I could drain myself completely, and they would still ask for more, because I had trained them to expect it. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the house breathe around me. I thought about how small my world had become, how carefully I'd folded myself to fit into a space that never truly wanted me. I thought about how my parents said they loved me, but only when my love looked like sacrifice. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine leaving, not in anger, not dramatically, but quietly. I imagined a place where my effort stayed mine, where my worth wasn't measured by what I could give away. The idea felt dangerous and comforting at the same time. By morning, the guilt was still there. But so was something new. Once the idea of leaving took root, it grew fast. It wasn't fueled by anger or spite, but by a steady, undeniable clarity. I stopped hoping things would change and started accepting that they wouldn't. That acceptance was strangely calming. It gave me permission to plan. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. I moved through the house as usual, paid rent on time, nodded during conversations that revolved around Aaron's struggles and dreams. Inside, though, I had already stepped away. I began saving every dollar I could without drawing attention. I sold things I didn't need, worked overtime, and quietly researched apartments late at night with my phone brightness turned down. When I found a small place on the other side of town, it felt unreal. It wasn't perfect, thin walls, old carpet, a kitchen barely big enough to turn around in, but it was affordable and available. Most importantly, it was mine. I signed the lease with hands that trembled, not from fear but from relief. Packing was the hardest part, not because of the workload but because every object carried a memory. I packed slowly, a little at a time, so no one would notice. Important documents went first, hidden at the bottom of my work bag. Clothes followed, then books, then the small personal things that had survived years of feeling out of place. I waited for a dramatic moment, an argument, a final insult, something that would justify leaving in a loud, obvious way. It never came. Instead, the house remained exactly as it always had been, comfortable for everyone but me. The morning I left was ordinary, too ordinary. My parents were out running errands. Aaron was asleep, his door closed, his world undisturbed. I loaded the last box into my car, stood in my empty room, and felt a wave of sadness I hadn't expected. Not for the people, but for the version of myself who had stayed so long, believing love would eventually meet her halfway. I placed my keys on the kitchen counter. For a second I considered leaving a note, explaining myself, softening the blow. Then I realized I had spent my entire life explaining myself. They knew what they had done. They just hadn't expected consequences. So I left without permission. The first night in my apartment was quiet in a way that felt sacred. No footsteps in the hallway, no television murmuring in the background, no tension hanging in the air. I sat on the floor with takeout and cried, not from grief but from release. I slept deeply for the first time in years. The messages started 3 days later. At first, they were confused, asking where I was, when I was coming back. Then they turned sharp, accusing me of being irresponsible, ungrateful, dramatic. My parents said I couldn't just walk away from family. Aaron sent a message saying I had messed everything up. I didn't respond. Weeks passed, and my life slowly expanded. I decorated my space with colors I liked. I cooked meals without guilt. I laughed more. I felt lighter, like I had been carrying a weight I hadn't even realized was crushing me. Meanwhile, the panic on the other end of my phone grew louder. The rent money was gone. The support system collapsed. Aaron wasn't stepping up. Reality hit hard, and for the first time, their chaos wasn't mine to manage. I had disappeared from the role they assigned me, and without it, everything they'd built around my sacrifice began to fall apart. It took 3 months before I agreed to see them. By then, my life had settled into something steady and calm. I had routines that belonged to me, mornings that didn't start with tension, evenings that didn't end in exhaustion. I wasn't rich and I wasn't carefree, but I was finally balanced. When my mom texted asking if we could talk, I stared at the message for a long time before answering. Not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to be sure I was ready. We met at a small cafe near my apartment, neutral ground. When I walked in, I almost didn't recognize them. My parents looked older, worn down in a way I hadn't seen before. The confidence they'd always carried was gone, replaced by something fragile. Aaron wasn't there. That alone said more than words ever could. My mom reached for my hand as soon as I sat down, but I gently pulled away. I wasn't angry, I just needed space. We didn't handle things well, she said, her voice tight. We thought you understood. I nodded slowly. I understood exactly what was happening. That's why I left. My dad sighed, rubbing his temples. He talked about bills, about stress, about how hard things had been since I moved out. He said they hadn't realized how much I'd been doing, how much they'd relied on me. The words sounded rehearsed, like they'd practiced them on the drive over. What about me? I asked quietly. They both went silent. I told them everything I'd never said before. How being strong had felt like being invisible. How paying more rent to support my brother made me feel less like a daughter and more like a tool. How every time they chose him, it taught me my role was to give and never ask. My mom cried. My dad looked at the table. We want you to come back, my mom said finally. We can figure something out. I shook my head. I don't want to come back. I want you to understand. That was the hardest truth to say out loud. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want apologies soaked in guilt or panic. I wanted acknowledgement, accountability, and boundaries. I told them I loved them, but I wouldn't sacrifice myself to keep their version of peace anymore. I wouldn't fund my brother's life. I wouldn't shrink so they could stay comfortable. My dad asked if there was anything they could do. Yes, I said. Respect my choices, and stop expecting me to fix what I didn't break. When we stood to leave, my mom hugged me carefully, like she was afraid I'd disappear again. This time I hugged her back, not out of obligation, but because I wanted to. On my terms. Walking home, I felt something settle inside me. Not triumph, not bitterness, closure. They were finally forced to face the consequences of their favoritism, not because I punished them, but because I stopped protecting them from reality. That was the sweet revenge. Choosing myself without cruelty. Walking away without destroying anything, except the illusion that I would always be there to save them. I unlocked my apartment door and stepped inside, into a life that no longer required me to earn my place.